Hello and welcome to another cybersecurity podcast. In this episode, we're talking about cyber desktop exercises, and to help with that, I have our cybersecurity and privacy expert, Alison Baylis, joining me.
Hello, good morning. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. So, Alison, should we start by defining what we mean by a cyber desktop exercise?
Yeah, of course. So a cyber exercise is actually where we construct a scenario and we take an organisation through it. And it's basically to test any existing cyber incident response plans that they have, to do it in a safe environment and for them to actually understand and get some learning and identify any risks or any gaps in that, and then obviously inform and update their plan as a result of that.
Okay, so it's sort of a simulation of an actual attack.
That's right, yeah. So effectively, I mean, you could think of it as being a little bit like a fire drill. You know, we do lots of fire drills because we're preparing ourselves to make sure that we leave a building safely in the event of an actual fire. A tabletop exercise is effectively doing that in terms of a cyber incident. So it's actually about preparing the organisation, about being in a safe environment, and about actually being able to go through a structured approach and we would take an organisation through something which would be a typical scenario, and some of the things that we're actually seeing, unfortunately, hitting the headlines at the moment, you know, are things that could affect any organisation, but it wouldn't just necessarily be a cyber attack. It could actually be any kind of incident that could impact on an organisation.
Okay, so the simulation can be ransomware, it could be a business continuity event.
Yeah, it could. I mean, it could be anything. It could be anything from a disgruntled insider. It could be perhaps an organisation that's got on-prem, sort of data centre that's got an impact there, whether it be flood or fire or an environmental issue, or it could be, a significant outage. So when we talk about a cyber incident, we're not just talking about malicious incidents. We're also talking about things that could happen, unintentionally.
Right, and why would an organisation want to do this?
So I think the thing is, it's really important from an organisation's perspective to make sure that you've got plans in place, but actually having plans is no good if you don't actually test them. And also you're making an assumption. You're making an assumption that actually things are going to work the way you expect them to. You're making an assumption that you've got the right people involved, but there's always learning that comes out of these incidents. The other thing as well is it's actually about giving assurance back to the executives and to all of your stakeholders, really, to make sure that they feel confident that you are well prepared and that you can respond and actually you've got all the right people involved and you've got a team that's ready to go.
So many organisations kind of rely on security controls. They buy products and software and so on, and I guess it's important to realise that security is more than that, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's really important. Obviously, it's important that organisations have got the preventative controls in place, but also equally important that they've got recovery and response in place so that they can actually identify an incident, contain it, investigate it, make sure that their environment is actually, free from any kind of risk before they actually start recovering their services.
Okay, so who would typically be involved in a sort of a desktop exercise like this?
So naturally, people will always look to the IT team, and the IT team have got a really, important part to play in this. But it's really important that there's exec representation. Those are the people that are making decisions. And when it comes down to it, if you're in the middle of an incident that's impacted on the organisation, then it's strategic business decisions that need to be made. So it's important that you've got IT. Yes, it's important that you've got executive representation, but also representatives from your compliance teams, people that look after data protection, from your communications teams, because communication is everything, and also from other areas like legal and and actually potentially subject matter experts from across the organisation, departmental representation as well.
So you're testing the whole process here, are you, end to end?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're testing the process, it's important to say that we say this all the time. When people talk about cyber, they automatically talk about it from an IT perspective, but we're talking about business impact here. So in order to fully understand the business impact and in order to actually respond to an incident, you need the whole business involved.
Yeah. So just talk us through how you would scope something like this, so how would you start?
Yeah. Yeah, so the important thing is that there's no one size fits all.
Okay.
It's no point us going into an organisation and just running, a standard exercise. We need to actually do some scoping with the organisation first, do a bit of discovery work, understand about how they operate, understand about what kind of sector they operate in, and actually build a scenario that's really, really relevant to them, so that actually, they do get some learning out of it and they are testing their own plans. So effectively what we do is we'd start with actually, introductory conversations and discovery work. Then we would build an incident that was relevant to them.
Okay.
We'd deliver the tabletop exercise through a workshop or, sort of on site or remotely. And then we'd actually do a post-incident or post-exercise wrap-up and present them with a report with some findings. We'd tell them what went well, and we'd also identify some recommendations and some gaps.
So it's a bit like a role play, isn't it? The actual incident. How realistic is it, or how realistic can you make it?
So you can make it really realistic because actually, being the kind of organisation that we are, we understand, the way that, say, for example, if we were talking about an attack, we understand the way attackers, sort of operate. So we can look at the techniques, the tactics and the procedures that they use. We can actually sort of start. So what typically happens is you start with an inject. You start with a scenario and then you start with, you start by injecting further information. And as the incident unfolds, then obviously, it changes the scenario and people have to react. And that's where it becomes quite difficult. And that's where, in a real life environment, people could start to panic. Whereas if they've gone through the tabletop exercise and they've tested it and they've identified where there might be some improvements to be made, and actually, they're able to take action then to plug those gaps, so that in the event of a real incident, they can
know
be confident
what to do.
Exactly,
So really, they're rehearsing in a safe, controlled manner.
Yeah.
How they will respond to a specific attack.
They are as well, and I think the important thing as well is that what we always say to people is that don't make any assumptions, and also, it's quite common for people to say, no, that wouldn't happen because we've got these controls in place.
Yeah.
Well, to make the most out of the exercise, sometimes you have to assume that they're not in place, but equally you need to understand that actually some of these incidents and some of these, if we were talking about an attack, it can circumvent your controls, so you can't actually be complacent about it.
No. Are you able to share some learnings from such exercises?
I think one of the key things would be around coordination.
Okay.
So, quite often what I've seen is that it's not a coordinated approach in an organisation. So I've seen examples of where real life incidents, actually not exercises, but real life incidents where IT have done a great job about restoring services in the event of an outage, but they've not thought about the data loss. And actually it's the data loss that's going to impact on the organisation. But equally what we've also seen is reliance on individuals. So actually if a key individual's not available because, they are allowed holidays, then that actually can completely collapse the process. Communications.
Okay. So,
if organisations haven't actually thought about how they might communicate and thought about reputational harm and thought about how they might respond to, sort of inquiries from the media, then actually, that can make a huge difference on the impact to an organisation. So there's quite a lot of things, that you find out. One of the other things I would say as well is that organisations and particularly IT teams know their digital environment pretty well. Yeah. But they don't necessarily know much about their information, where it's held, where it's stored, how many records there are. So in the event of a data breach that impacted on personal data, if an organisation is in a position where they need to actually report to the Information Commissioner on how many records could be impacted, sometimes they don't know how much of that information there is and where it's stored. There's just a complacency, people come in, they turn on their laptops, they carry on with their work, and they don't necessarily think about it in terms of its value and, sort of the impact and that side of things.
So organisations could argue that they sort of outsource IT or outsource security. They might have a SOC, Security Operating Centre, involved. So would this kind of exercise involve those stakeholders? Yeah,
that's a good point, actually. So it's really important to involve stakeholders, and it's really important as well, it's a good point, is that there's sometimes an assumption around roles and responsibilities. So one of the real key things about tabletop exercise and about cyber incident response plans is about making sure that the roles and responsibilities are understood. and they're assigned appropriately.
Yeah.
And one of the other things we do sometimes see is a problem between the process between, sort of a third party. So we could have examples whereby somebody contacts an organisation asking for some support to find that actually, they're not on the list of the approved contacts for the organisation, or it could be that actually, another example might be that organisations might actually have cyber insurance. Well, actually, have they got a process of how they're going to invoke that cyber insurance? Do they know about what the coverage is? Do they know whether the cyber insurance provider is going to provide them with the right level, an organisation or individuals that are going to help them to respond to the incident? So it's actually it tests all of those assumptions, and it also allows organisations really to really sort of test and understand what they have in place, and make sure that they can learn from it and make some improvements and continuously improve their plans.
So just going back to the structure of these exercises. So there's a scoping element, and then you conduct the actual exercise, which is often on site with the stakeholders, I guess in a room.
Yeah.
And you sort of you facilitate a scenario, role play a scenario. There's various injects into that. So I guess if they respond, then you're kind of responding to that, and then they respond, and then so you're making it as realistic as possible, and as the scenario unfolds.
Yeah.
And then, but how do you then conclude the exercise? What happens?
Yeah, so in terms of concluding the exercise, actually it's really important to get feedback from the people that have been participating. So one of the things we do is to ask them what they think went well and what they thought could have gone better, and sort of give them observations and give them some feedback, and then from that and have a discussion, and then following that feedback we talk, we would create a sort of a report for them and recommendations. So but I think it is really important is that organisations want to be able to respond, they want to be able to do well, they want and they will often have an incident response plan in place. So it's really important to recognise that organisations are working to try and sort of be prepared for incidents, but then also to recognise that actually there's always going to be somewhere where there's going to be some learning, there's always going to be some improvements that you can make.
And the key is they're rehearsing it in a safe environment, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because often, when you're under pressure in a real environment, that's when mistakes happen.
That's the thing, it is really important. And actually going back to what you said about learning, one of the other things that is really important is that quite often organisations don't document the activities that are, sort of during an incident. So actually if you document the activities, it means that you're identifying, sort of time frames, and you've got a timeline then. And certainly if you've got an incident that then involved, regulatory bodies and people wanting to, sort of investigate what happened. Perhaps if it was a personal data breach and the Information Commissioner's Office wanted to know more about it. If you've got that timeline and you've got a scribe within the organisation that's actually making a note of every activity that people are doing, then that's really important. It's really valuable.
Yeah. So I was just thinking, can we also include sort of phishing attempts, for example, so a phishing exercise associated with a desktop exercise, just to add some more realism? But I guess that's dependent on the maturity of the client, isn't it? Because you wouldn't want to do it straight away. You step into that.
So some organisations will want to run through it as a tabletop exercise, so it's just a run through, but also organisations might actually want to take it to the next stage, and they might actually want to almost like role play it and enact it as though it was a real incident. And actually that's quite interesting because, then you start testing the decision making, you start testing the accessibility of people and, response times. And that can make obviously the actual activity of doing the exercise longer, but it can also add a lot of value as well. But we could actually add, sort of some real simulation into there as well.
So you could start with a fairly easygoing, sort of friendly roundtable discussion about what would you do in the event of and then work your way up to quite a realistic environment where you've got various technical injects and people coming into the room saying, the media is on the phone and so on. Yes, okay, so it can be quite realistic.
It can be really good. And actually, some organisations even take the stance of actually doing this without warning.
Okay.
So actually, I do know, of examples where somebody within the organisation's just walked into an exec meeting and said, "I'm really sorry, we've got a problem," and they've taken it from there. So, like you say, a little bit like organisations doing a phishing simulation, you could actually do a real life incident simulation.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a good way of understanding where your weaknesses are in your response process.
Yeah, it is. It's very much so. And actually, there's always something to learn. People's environment's changing all of the time. Sort of structures and roles within an organisation are changing all of the time. So it's really important that people keep on top of these plans and they do conduct tests, not just once, but frequently, to actually, and to respond to different scenarios as well.
So how long would a typical exercise take?
So, obviously, if we take into account the scoping and the discovery work, then we have to account for some time for that. We typically take half a day to a day doing an exercise. That would depend on whether it was tabletop run through or whether it was, sort of more role play or simulation. And then with the report as well. So typically the whole exercise would be around 3 to 4 days. Okay. But that would be from the scoping right through to conducting it, right through to the reporting. But the actual, the actual involvement of the participants would be at the discovery phase and then during the exercise. So that would, like I say, typically be half to a full day.
Okay. And would you then summarise for us, Alison, just some of the key benefits?
Yep, of course, yeah. So I think the key benefit really is that it allows you to test your response plans in a safe environment, in a structured environment. It gives you the ability to kind of like test those plans, to identify the weaknesses, identify sort of any gaps, and to update them accordingly. It will then obviously give confidence to your organisation. It would give confidence to your stakeholders if they know that you're testing your plans. The same, like I say, often organisations will get asked around business continuity, and this tests that. And it also helps you to identify some other areas. So one of the things that sometimes comes out of this is organisations will actually start to calculate how long it would take them to recover and to back up their data.
Right, okay.
So something that you might not typically think of is that actually organisations retain a lot of information that they don't need. So actually then they're going to lose a lot of time in recovering information that actually they don't really need in the organisation, or perhaps it's past its retention period. So that's another one of the learnings that you talked about earlier. But in essence, it's a safe environment to allow an organisation to test its existing response plans, to engage people across the organisation and to make sure that people understand that they've all got a part to play, to be able to identify those weaknesses and to build on those weaknesses and to, sort of continually improve it, so that actually in the event of an incident, which we say it's a case of when, not if, then they feel confident and able to respond in a more confident manner.
Excellent. Alison, thank you very much. Very interesting. And that's all for now. If you have any comments or feedback, please let us know. And if you want to know more about cyber desktop exercises, there is more information on our website. But other than that, we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to our cybersecurity podcast. If you're keen to learn more, please visit our website www.aristi.co.uk. Cybersecurity made simple.